Hey, welcome to the Open House Show. It's Monday afternoon, morning for some of our viewers. We have a great show for you today. We are in the middle of re-enrollment season. So we're going to be talking a lot about retention today, some initiatives, trying to keep attrition low. We've got a great guest with decades of experience in this situation, Dean of Enrollment Management and Admissions over at the Darrow School, Kristen Kaschub. Let's bring her on. Let's get started. I know everyone's got a busy day. Hello, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
Excellent, excellent. I cannot complain. So, let's jump right into it. I appreciate you taking the time. I know this is a busy time of year with all of our show guests that come on. So we'll try to keep it as potent as possible for everyone. But tell us about, I alluded to it a little bit, you're well-versed, well-knowledge. Tell us a little bit about, your journey in admissions. I know you always loved talking before about how it kind of touches every aspect of society and how it's interesting for you and how you got to the Darrow School.
Sure. So thank you for this opportunity, by the way. I think this is really great. I love talking about anything admissions. I have been in admissions, like you said, for a long, long time. It's going on 20 years now. Actually, it is 20 years this year. So I actually had an entire career in New York City doing HR for a long time because that was something that I was really fascinated by. And I knew that I would go back to my alma mater at some point, and I ended up falling in love with the whole admission process. I wasn't sure if I knew I wasn't going to teach, but I wasn't sure what I would be doing at a boarding school, and I just happened to fall into it. I went back to one of my reunions and met a teacher, and he said, go check out the admission office. And that's how I started back in the day, right after 9/11 at Northfield Mount Hermon. So, and I have now just recently, I spent several years out in California, in Southern California, and came back to my roots in New England. And I'm at the Darrow School in upstate New York. And I've only been here since the summer, but, a lot of work to be done and a really crazy time to be switching schools, I think, in the midst of such chaos in the world. And you're right, admissions does genuinely hit every aspect of everything. And that's what's so fascinating about it. I mean, how else would COVID impact everything that we do here? I mean, it's just unreal what's happening this year and in the foreseeable future too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is an interesting time. I mean, you switch gears. It's always, trying to get acclimated to a new job. Obviously there's always office politics and, history that goes along with these things. And then you throw in, board members and managing the different personalities involved there and expectations. And then, hey, let's go ahead and throw a pandemic with it. In a state that's populated and we'll get to kind of the regional recap, but in a state that's going to be definitely throwing curveballs your way, just because of the sheer numbers that's going on. But it does it forced us all to take a fresh look at how we do things, and it was kind of like a beginning process for everyone. You jumping into the Darrow School, getting equipped with what draws families to them, as well as what new things do we have to do to mitigate, running admissions departments with the pandemic going on. What did you find during that process? What is it that's really, special about the Darrow School that's bringing, families in that regard?
Yeah. So what I've actually seen a lot of is that we get a number of families who are calling sort of really, speaking towards their kids languishing in their home environments doing virtual school. And I think it's going to have some long-term impacts on our youth. It's in terms of social interactions, in terms of depression and anxiety. And I think some of the families and parents are really starting to look at it and feel like they need to switch gears, especially if this is going to continue on. And what I've found for Darrow is that a number of these families are looking to make that switch, though they wouldn't normally have considered it in the past. They're looking at boarding school because they feel and value that social interaction and that community component and that in-person learning. It's so crucial for these kids, especially if they have any kind of if they need that structure, if they need that connection with teachers. It's really hard to do that in larger classes online. So what folks have been calling Darrow for is the small setting, because we're a small school of about 100 students. They're looking for that experiential based learning. And one of the things that we always touch on in any conversation we have with families is the power of the community, and how we're all keeping each other sane, and how we're all keeping each other healthy and creating our bubble by being here together. And there's a lot of power in that. And I think that's going to continue. I mean, we've seen it even in the mid-year enrollments. Families are just really concerned about their kids and what this looks like in the future.
And with the Darrow School being small, obviously you fit that need that they're having now. But even with some of these larger schools, and it kind of transitions into my next question, is there are some things that have happened because of the pandemic where I agree. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I mean, those kind of value systems are what we've been built on, with independent schools, and having that community feel and having that environment, those intangible things that you can't really explain very well. You just, that's why you say you got to get them on campus so they can feel this kind of experience and experience it themselves. Do you think that, the pandemic, or rather, a better question, how is the pandemic, do you think, forever changed the perception, the general public that may not have, had a good idea of what we do and how we do it and what it might mean for them? What are some things you think are going to be lasting? I mean, how do you think it's changed that perception and how they view, private institutions and independent schools?
Yeah. So it will most definitely continue to hold these differentiators for schools, because I think those schools that really struggled in that transition to virtual are the ones that really saw the decrease or the increase in attrition. And I think that those that really mastered it or were already able to do something similar to their in-class but do it virtual are the ones that are really going to be leaders in this. But I do think snow days are a thing of the past. I mean, we've already established that we can do this virtually. If it's just for one day because the snowplows can't hit the roads, then we're going to make it happen. But I think that there's, things that we do in admissions and the way that we've switched or sort of pivoted a little bit by not having folks on campus, by doing all these virtual open houses, virtual visits, connections with teachers, all of this will still be here. And I think it will and I was talking with some folks internationally about whether or not it's really going to be pertinent or necessary for us to travel, which is amazing to me, because there's so many ways in which we have let folks in virtually. That's going to be an expectation that we're going to have to continue, in addition to all that in-person interaction that we've always done. And I think that's in some ways, that's great. I mean, I think it really makes you think about who are your stars within your community, who is able to really convey your message, who is somebody that can engage somebody that doesn't even know your community. Like, what are those powerful moments and touchstones that folks are really looking for? And that's what's going to flush out of this. And those that can really, really master that, I'm not saying that I have mastered it. I think any kind of meeting that I've gone to where colleagues are coming together, everyone's like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? Is it working? Is it working? I don't know. Some people are doing month-long open houses. Some people are doing a day-long, jump in, jump out, meet kids, go to classes, and some people are just doing your traditional virtual open houses. I mean, there's some things, we're all becoming sort of masters of psychology in some ways, because we're thinking, well, how long can we have their attention? Normally we would do an open house and it would be like a 4-hour adventure, right? They'd come to campus, they'd do a tour, they'd sit in the class, they'd get to eat in the dining hall, they would see the dorms, they would do all of this. But in reality, when you're home, you have their attention for maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Anything over that, and they just sort of zone out. And that's some of the things that I think is going to come through in this moment.
Not even that, like even within that hour, how with virtual component, you don't have that actual physical ability or inability to transition to different subjects or different places. When you got the virtual component, how do we switch this off to them and keep them engaged throughout this whole hour? We talk about this, and especially if you're tailoring it, like if it was, feeder schools compared to, stealth applicant compared to, an athletic interest, you can throw them with a coach, and the coach could say their part, they're ready to go at this time. And then you flip it back over to admissions. And there's a lot of different things that you can do virtually that would highlight the stars that you've found, and that tell your story best. We're on a tour, you kind of go through your motions, and, it is what it is. There's no other way around, walking or maybe driving a golf cart through some places. Where you can take quick snapshots, get their attention, give them some insightful information in very different ways. Virtually. And I agree, that's not going anywhere. I mean, including if we were, if you guys are traveling around the road, still doing things, to have that virtual component, I mean, that's going to be there. I can picture many of school fairs where everyone's like, hey, and if you go to the website, we have this 360 tour. You don't even have to come to campus. You can ask questions and all of these things. And that wasn't prevalent, before it had to be, which was, the pandemic. So that's interesting. Talking about, some of the new students and obviously the different perceptions that families have of independent schools now, it's gained a lot of interest in a variety of areas. And that's true across the whole country. It seems to be pretty much staying in par with how did your local government or state, in some cases, handle things? How do you at least expect them to handle things? And if any of that was poorly, those COVID boom bump numbers that we talk about, those were up for independent schools. And, when we talk about keeping those, some of those, obviously, every year there's some that are, especially when you deal with the international market and boarding students, there's just some that are coming for an experience. They're not going to stay. But generally speaking, what are some methods and some practices, throughout this current school or others that you've been at that, that you've really seen have helped and worked well with trying to retain students year in and year out, and may, to kind of further plug it, may help impact a lot of this COVID boom numbers that we've got that, they might not have been here last year, but given everything that they have now, how do we keep them? Right.
So I can't stress enough that retention is really everyone's job from day one. I think it starts from the admission experience that folks have. How do they feel heard, taken care of, responded to? What is that level of interaction, and how do you carry that throughout? I feel like admissions, there's a lot of high touch. There's a lot of what can we do for you? And that, even more so today, has to continue through their entire experience. Mm-hmm. And that means anything from over the summer, how do you keep them engaged and prevent that summer melt? So is that, having various touch points from people within your community, from your current students, reaching out to new students, to connecting parents with parents, doing luncheons, all of that's just over the summer. Let's talk about, who you're going to live with, what do you like, what do you not like, how can we help? There to do that virtually. I mean, I was listening to one school who had actually done, they had a video interview or sort of meeting with the dean of students, and then sort of sent that on to the advisor. So that's like amazing. Like, you can really get to know the student and then share it with somebody within the community, because that's the next step, right? So they get to the campus, and it's that advisor connection. It's that amount of personal attention that both the parents and the students alike feel that they continue to receive from the school, whether it be their advisor, their coach, their house parent, their teacher. And I got to say, more and more, it's about this concierge service, and not just in admissions. It's everything. Families want to know that their kid is the center of your universe. And they want to know that you're taking care of them, that their learning style, that when there's a problem or when they're not sleeping, that you're aware of it, and that you're communicating with the families so they're not on the outside or the fringe, but that they're brought into the experience. I think that there's lots of ways to do that. That could be anything from a newsletter to how many times the advisor reaches out formally, to parent meetings and fostering that parent ambassador program where families that really adore the community can actually speak on your behalf and say how amazing it is. And then, of course, I mean, this all goes without saying that your product is everything that you've already said it was in your admission process.
Right.
Because if there's a huge disconnect, you're not going to be able to retain that person anyway. But what you want to do is make sure that, one, that it is the same, but two, that they feel that they're part of something, right? That the parents are even part of something. And I think that that's going to be powerful going forward. And it's not going away. It's really not going away. You really want to make it so that families have no reason to look elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And they feel that they can't leave. Like, it's like leaving a family. Like, you don't want to leave my family. I don't want to leave my community. Like, this is where I'm growing best. I don't want to leave that. And, I do think that the pandemic, in a positive way, really emphasized and got everyone on board as far as faculty and staff buy-in in ways that they didn't have the ambition and necessity before. And what I mean by that is there was no job or task in a school, and much less any industry, that wasn't directly affected, where they got people out of their comfort zones. And how do we, make sure that we're able to do our jobs or do our task and retain, in some cases, like, keep everything afloat budgetary wise, like what are the things that we're going to need to be doing? And with teachers, we're going to have to commit to virtual. We're going to have to figure out ways in doing things here. Custodial staff, we're going to have to be adding all these extra steps to make sure this place is clean routinely throughout the day, not just in the mornings. There was a lot of things and efforts that were made and refocused to where everyone on campus was so involved in making this work. I think that, that kind of matched the admissions level. There you'd see sometimes where everyone's just kind of set in their ways, especially with, older schools that just kind of have their way of doing things and aren't really going to be in the motions of changes. You have this admissions department that's getting this huge, perfect, first impression. And then they go into the next step, enrollment, and then they get their classes, and then they continue on, and somewhere there's a drop. You know what I mean? And that affects retention, because someone somewhere down the line was not caring for the individual in the way that the family thought that they should, or at least was sold by admissions in some way. And I think that has changed a lot with this. And I think if that buy-in continues, I mean, that's going to do wonders to the communities that we have currently. Has that been something that maybe you've seen or heard about in other schools, like just that reigniting of that community feel?
I think, well, I mean, if you think about it, everything that we've done on campus has shifted as well. So that includes any way in, like, any of the community activities that we used to have, either sent kids off campus or, we did activities on campus. All of that has shifted. So there are ways in which we have to develop and design community virtually, even in the presence of a community, because we can't all be in one space, right? So, in the fall, we were doing a lot of things outside, and we were having concerts and festivals, and we bring in food trucks, and we develop community that way. But now we're doing things where we're all really genuinely creating that family. So we're doing fun quiz nights, like, where it's not just the students quizzing each other, like, how much do you know a senior? It's us faculty putting up baby pictures and being like, can you figure out who this is? Things like that you create this community even in a time when we can't all physically be together all the time because of COVID concerns. I do think that the faculty are much more aware of this piece of making sure everyone is content and taken care of. But I also think that we can't take that for granted. So we're always going to have to continue to educate our communities about the power of retention and the power of communication and how important it is. And that's everything from, this is what our class would look like if these 5 students leave, or these 6 students leave. This would mean X, or this is what it looks like to find another student. And so everyone needs to be aware of the competitive nature of our industry and why it's so important to hold on to the folks that we have. And So I just think that we're no longer going to be in silos. I think you're right, and I don't think that we should have been in the beginning. I think it all is interconnected. We all have the same intentions. We want to support the student in their transition and their success in school, and so we all have to be team players in doing that. And that's everything from the custodial staff to the dining hall to the teachers and the head of school and dean of students, dean of academics, whatever it may be. So yeah, I just think it's going to be so crucial to be all on the same page.
Yeah, and I think there's a really good focus on that campus wide, and you're right. I mean, listen, when I was handling the dorms, it was I don't want to have to reacclimate a new boarder. I mean, if I obviously I want to keep the funnel going, but at the same time, I'd much prefer that they stay, grow in the culture, graduate, and I replace that than having to have all these new students. Same thing with classes. I mean, like you want someone that has been into the same system and the same teachers that and gone through that process, biology and marine biology and or do you want someone totally new every single year? It's always beneficial to continue in that progress and go through. I wonder, boarding school, you guys are a boarding school. What are my experience? We had, I was a boarder. It's easy to feel that culture. I mean, we lived there. The experiences that we went through, the highs and lows, that community feel, we didn't have a choice. Like I couldn't block out my school. I lived here. I was here all the time, so that I don't want to say you don't have to work on it, because there are positive ways that you can influence that and negative ways you can influence that depending on what you're doing as an administration. But it does come a little bit easier to have that feel than a day student. So, I'm curious, what are some things that you've been able to do to try to, foster that community in the day student population? Every boarding school I've ever talked to, it's always like, how do we get the day students more involved? How do we get them to be back on campus for these events? And how do we get their buy-in and things like this? What are some things that you've seen work over your time?
Right. Yeah, that is sort of the conundrum, right? There are folks that really genuinely see, even though it is a boarding school, that they see it as just school. And it's hard, there's always going to be a few of those. But I do think that, I always say to families when they're looking at boarding school that this could be, where you arrive at 8 and you leave at 6:30 at night. Or it could be you arrive at 8 and you leave at 3. That is it's really your mindset. And it's also your level of engagement within the activities and offerings that the community allows for, whether it be theater or sports or clubs or things like that. And in the midst of COVID, it's been really a struggle. I mean, we have been doing, even though we're fully in person, we are doing sort of a hybrid virtual model in the sense that student classes are small, but we've even halved them so they're even smaller. So half the school takes their class online in their dorm room while the other half is in the class, and then they switch the next day. And so that holds true for D students' day. So can you imagine if you're literally only on campus 2 days a week, then what?
Right.
And so what we ended up doing, we realized that in the fall, it was a real struggle, but also logistically speaking, they become sort of that anomaly where we're concerned about maintaining our own bubble. And this is just another factor of bringing in a possible, way in which our bubble is burst. So how do we change that? So what we did was we brought all of our day students to campus this semester. So all the day students are moving into the dorms, and they're thrilled. They're absolutely thrilled. And I think that was the right move. And that was the right move for a lot of reasons. And so I think that what's important in times like these, and I hate to keep using this word, but because it's sort of like industry standard, pivot, unprecedented pivot. These are words that everyone's saying, but it's true. You really do have to be nimble. You have to be nimble. You have to be able to address. And that's also part of this discussion about attrition, is that if you hear that things are happening, either for an individual, for a group, for a subset, whether it be, people are feeling that this particular teacher they're not connecting with, or they're really sad that this program is not thriving, the second you hear that, you really need to sort of jump in and say, wait a minute, this is why these students came here. How do we make it something that they value again? And so what do we need to change? And so for us, the day student experience was to bring students to campus so they felt more connected in the time of COVID. Because I think, again, it's that community piece, being all together. And, maybe it'll convert to some extra boarders next year. We'll see. Contracts haven't gone out yet, but we'll see. So I think that it's things like that that are really going to be powerful for schools. If you can really listen, put your ear to the ground and listen to what your community or what your families and students are saying.
No, that's awesome. What a good program to have. And we had one where it was we tried to take the dorm parents out for a night, so we would have the teachers be the dorm parents and try to give them the experience of what it was like to be in the dorms. Now you throw it down. Hey, let's bring the day students back on here. Now they're going to know what it's like to have that experience, and that's a great way to get them intertwined. I imagine there's I don't know how much outdoor stuff you're doing now, but I imagine there's fun activities that they could be doing, and just that general camaraderie that they're gonna get by living in the dorm with them. It's like I was talking about earlier from my own experience. For a day student to get that at least before they go to college, that's awesome. That's great. I wonder how were you able to get some of those insights? Do you have, at our old school, we had the kind of a retention committee, and they met. It was a variety of different coaches and academy leads, deans, obviously, of all the levels, upper school, lower school, middle school. And they would discuss things that they were hearing and things like that. What does that look like at the Darrow School, and what have you experienced maybe at previous schools that worked really well as far as getting those insights from families and students?
Right. So here, what we've done to keep the lines of communication open is we've done basically fireside chats. So in the evening, our head of school, dean of students, director of academics would hop on a call and listen to what parents had to say. We would say, what's changed, what's new, what are we doing? But then also sort of allow time for questions and concerns. And so it was really percolating through those meetings that, this was a concern, that they were really worried that their day student children were feeling disconnected, and which is a shame, because they really were coming to Darrow because of this community that we are so proud of. And so I think that, that was where we were hearing it. We also, what we've done, what we've noticed, because a number of boarding schools did this, where they did the fall term until Thanksgiving, and then the students went home. So they had a little bit of time at the tail end of the first semester where they were online or virtual, whatever they called it. We called it a staymester. And then depending upon their return, they might have had a little bit on the front end of the second semester. So that's the case for us. And what we were finding is that some kids were getting pulled into their own lives, like parents were tapping them for taking care of the younger kids.
Yep.
Or they didn't have time to be in class, or they weren't able to do their homework. We had students who really thrive in the in-person and were not able to sort of focus and really be efficient in the online environment. And so we got together as a team, in particular those that are participating in our learning skills program, and listen to who is really thriving and who has really fallen off, whether it be they're oversleeping, they're too tired, they can't engage, they're not accountable, whatever the reason. How do we support them? And so we actually reached out to all of those families and said, how's it going? We think that maybe you could benefit from coming back early. We're opening the doors. So now we're doing like this extended rolling return. So again, it's this like responding to what you're hearing and what the experience has been, because that's your community. You need to be aware. Now, other schools I know are doing surveys of their families. And depending upon, how sophisticated you are technology wise, it could be very simple. Just put together a survey, how's it going? How are we doing? Would you recommend us? And then leave a room for comments. Say, where are the areas of concern? And there's lots of ways to take the pulse of the community. I think there's a number of like these evening parent events where we're connecting with our families. There also might be a parent association where the parents themselves are getting together. And so the leaders of that can come back and inform the administration and say, listen, these are concerns that I'm hearing. I think you might want to look at XYZ. So you just need to be aware. You can't assume everything's okay, because not everyone is going to be the squeaky wheel, right? You're gonna find it out in other ways. You're gonna find it out when somebody asks for a recommendation. or you're going to find it out when you heard that so and so was having a really hard time with such and such teacher or such and such roommate. These are moments of opportunity for schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a very important part to that is obviously when you listen, enacting some sort of change, like, give them some sort of some show that it was for a purpose. Like, hey, I hear you. Here's what we're going to do. And that's not always possible. I mean, I've heard, in my dealings, parents asking for things that are just like, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. That's not even possible. So, but where there is, opportunity to enhance the student experience or enhance the family experience, why not? Why can't we do that? Like, show them that we're listening and that we're able to implement something based off of your recommendations. And that's that two-way street of communication and how that community actually gets even stronger. Because now that's the word of mouth person that's going to go out there and just praise everything. They listen to us, they enact what we need to do. And, that's a great situation to be in doing something.
And I think that in the end is really what you're aiming for, right? Long-term advocates.
Mm-hmm.
So people that, had such a wonderful experience. They're talking about it, years down the line. I had a father who called me and said, "Oh, an ex-girlfriend of mine went to Darrow and wouldn't stop talking about it. So I thought when my son was doing XYZ, I wanted to call because it sounds like it'd be such a great fit." I was like, "Wow, I've never heard that one." So it does happen. It does happen.
That's a good point. How have you seen, the Parents Association or whatever equivalent organization a school has? How have you seen that, leveraged for retention efforts in the school community? Obviously they're advocates for the school, or hopefully they're advocates of the school if they're on the Parents Association. But what have you seen, like some direct ideas or some direct things that a school has said, "Hey, we really could use your help in X, Y, or Z," or some things that they've maybe involved the Parents Association in that have really helped out with retention efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of those efforts have been around communication and how do we best communicate with families. So really looking at those parents and saying, well, do you have a connection with this family? We'd love to because sometimes the families are not going to tell you specifically, whether it be an administrator or a teacher, but they might tell a peer. So I think that there are times when families can speak with other families and say, "Oh, how's it going?" And then relay back a little bit. And then maybe you can come at it from another angle. The way that I've facilitated using parents is, one, we've had them work intimately with our development office and giving them opportunities to sort of volunteer and be part of that messaging, saying, this place is so wonderful. They've done amazing work with my child. I'm so happy to talk about it. And those sound bites, not only are they good for, development, but they're also really good in our marketing efforts because it's a parent or community voice, right? Like, I can talk till I'm blue in the face, but until they speak to somebody who's actually experienced it and they know is not tainted by the bottom dollar, that they really start to believe them. Work with your parents or your board members as they have connections in your community, whether it be fostering feeder schools or working with other families, spreading the word. I mean, there are plenty of parents who are engaged in community involvement outside of the Darrow community that might be great feeders to what we do here, whether it be community theater, sports teams, local YMCA, whatever it is. I feel like families can really be an advocate on so many levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you get into, like you said, bringing them to the development office, obviously they're going to be going into what do they do, what's their impact in the community, and not so much leveraging that, but involving them. So what benefits them and benefits us. And it's just this constant, again, it's another aspect of a two-way benefit of the community and how the school benefits the family benefits the school. Right. In both ways. And it's a win-win situation. And to be honest with you, when you have low attrition, I don't see how a school doesn't have this. Right. It's a necessity to be able to interact with your families in this way, which is great.
Well, just like you would have student ambassadors, you can have parent ambassadors. So, for example, we have a group of students and a group of parents that we know that as we have students in the pipeline who are interested or have been accepted and want to know or learn more about their experience and why they believe this community is so great, they're your best advocates.
Yep.
So, this is only going to help you. And I think that, again, that goes back in terms of retention, as I was saying before, that it starts the second they sign that contract. So a lot of that summer work can be parents being like, hey, we'd love to welcome you to the community, whether it be, making it a formal match, just like you would do like a big sib, little sib with a student.
Yep.
This is sort of your guide to our community. You can do that throughout the summer. You can do that throughout the year, or you can do that throughout the admission process. So there's lots of ways in which you can connect with your current parents.
Yeah, that parent-student buddy, current parent, current student buddy system, for the new families to get acclimated. It's brilliant. There was a school we talked to a few months ago, and they had a similar setup, and it's very beneficial. They were doing it when school started, but you talk about over the summer, that's when the nerves are. It kind of boils over. You get on campus, and now I'm really nervous, but then everything starts to, hopefully, if you're doing it right, starts to get acclimated and start to calm down. But, that general excitement over the summer, it's like, okay, here we go. We got to prepare. We got to go buy this. We got to go buy that. What are we going to need? Like, those are perfect times to have those conversations with someone that's there, that's experiencing, that you can expect when you arrive to help you through this process.
Because excitement can turn to anxiety if you don't follow it. So that's why we want to make sure that people feel connected right out of the gate.
Absolutely. Well, that was great. I mean, I don't know if there's a harder transition that I'm going to throw at you right now, but, we always like to talk about, the region and what you might be seeing in your area. I know that there have been several guests that we've had on that are kind of riding that urban rural borderline there, that housing and migration has been a big factor for them, but obviously with COVID, now we're going back up with the rises. Actually, I would even say even higher peaks than we were before. What are we seeing in New York? What are you experiencing there in regards to any mandates or any restrictions? And then after that, enrollments. What are you seeing trending wise in enrollment?
Right. So yeah, we are legitimately seeing that sort of flee from the city effect. The housing market around here is just on fire. I mean, the houses just do not stay on the market for very long. And that, or families that had second homes up here already, are starting to see this as maybe their primary residence. Mm-hmm. And keeping the place in the city as sort of a place to go on the weekends for a show. I don't know if that'll stay, but I do think that a lot of families, just like we were saying, how our world is going to still remain partially virtual, whether it be, wanted or not wanted. I think that a lot of families or professionals are really thinking, well, why do I have to go in the office? So mm-hmm. I can work from anywhere. So that is what we're seeing. So the Hudson Valley area, from Albany over to the Massachusetts border and moving into the Berkshires, which is where we are. We're in the Berkshires, even though we're in New York State. All of those markets are really on fire. So the public schools have really seen an increase of students, but regional areas have also been struggling, as you said. Like the rates of infection are really creeping up, and then the second you get this other variant of the coronavirus, then who knows what's going to happen. But one thing that's going in our favor is that here we are with all the vaccines. Right. So there is hopefully some light at the end of the tunnel. But what we found is that we have families that have moved up from the city. They're going to the regional public schools and realizing that it's not really what they envisioned, and are looking for either day school or boarding school options. So there has been an uptick of families that may have not really considered it in the past because they were fine with their New York City schools. But I was actually on a call with New York City. It was supposed to be New York State schools. It ended up being a lot of New York City schools. And even though they did see this attrition where families did leave, they actually themselves say that it's a 50-50 whether or not their families that left will return. So I found that really interesting. So there is an opportunity here for us. And I've always said since the beginning of this that the longer that these public schools are online, the more of a window boarding schools have, and independent schools that are doing it, they're being able to be in person, are really going to see sort of opportunity or sort of a window to get into more homes than we thought we could have in the past.
Yeah.
So that's what we're seeing. I mean, but that migration went up from like southern Vermont, Massachusetts, that northwest corner of Connecticut, and all of the Hudson Valley have seen this huge uptick in population.
I'd be interested to see, and you just kind of sparked an off-topic interest, but I'd be interested to see how this plays out, as these vaccines get implemented, because I don't think that there's anyone that would argue that these virtual methods of doing business are going to go anywhere. I'm not, I don't think they would say it's going to stay the same, but I think there's a lot of industries that are seeing overhead costs go down and really weighing the cost of, do I really need to pay rent for an office and all of the utilities that go along with it, or can we do this virtually? And if so, what does that mean for the employees? How are they going to migrate now that they're not attached to a specific address, where I can be able to do my work, like you say, from other places? If that doesn't change for me, I wonder if this migration that we see moving and benefiting some, kind of outskirt areas of urban areas, and then obviously the suburbs and rural communities, how is that going to affect enrollment, long term? Something you might not think about. We all thought that we were going to have trouble getting students, and then you have this COVID boom late summer out of nowhere. It's like, okay, how do we keep these students? And you see these trends in migration. Is that going to continue? Maybe there's some real opportunity there.
It may. I mean, I think there will be some upside to it in the short term. I do worry about the ability for these families to continue to afford the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So just like I was saying, how it does touch everything. I mean, COVID has impacted businesses. It's impacted employment. It's impacted whether or not kids go to school. It's impacted almost everything: transportation, the ability to buy generators and get parts from overseas, whatever it may be. It's literally everything. And that trickles down to us.
Yep.
So, what I've seen, I mean, I just had to go through all of the returning student financial aid, and I'm seeing that there are families that have been directly impacted by COVID. So while they may want other options or better choices, whether or not they can afford it is going to be where the rubber hits the road, right? And
Yep.
you're going to have to really look at what the financial aid models look like in the future.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about on the show a few weeks ago, and actually dealing with one of our clients right now. They're doing tuition talks. They're doing tuition resets. They're doing tuition freezes. They're, whatever your plan may be, because, it does vary school to school what's best for you. That's a big topic of conversation now, like it hasn't been before, just for the exact reasons that you bring up there. So that's huge. Yeah. I mean, we talked about it a little bit with obviously the migration patterns and the COVID boom, and you have this retention. But we always like to close on a positive note, some optimism. What do you think, or where do you feel the biggest opportunity enrollment is going to be from this year?
Wow. Okay. Well, I think that what we're probably going to see, I don't know, it's kind of everything's shifted. Everything shifted. I mean, I've heard that the big name schools have actually gotten rid of the requirement for testing. They've waived their application fee. I think it's a ball game now. I mean, literally, but what's going to happen with that is there's going to be a trickle down to every other school too. So what does that mean in terms of the admissions timeline? Will schools be full, April 10th when they want to be, or is it all going to roll right through till August? So I do think that there is going to be an uptick of interest because, again, going back to that in-person, the power of the community and the power of in-person. And we know that as a result of boarding school. I mean, I went to boarding school for 4 years, you went to boarding school, and you know what the power of that is. But I still to this day have to have conversations and say, this isn't Harry Potter. You're not sending him away because he was bad. You're sending him away because it's an opportunity of a lifetime. That's why you're doing this. And So I do think that the upside is that there's a little bit more openness to boarding schools, but in terms of our profession, in terms of admissions, I think that it's going to be uncertain and it's going to be a ride for the next couple years. That's what I foresee. I think that we're going to be, it's going to be a hard year to project this year. I think it's going to be a hard couple years to project financial aid wise, because sometimes, they said, I think it was NAIS that was saying that it wasn't 2008 where they saw the impact.
Yeah, years after.
It was 2 years after.
Yep.
So we've got about a 2-year window here where we're in it for the long haul, and that's if we know when COVID ends. So I think
right.
While this has been a really crazy year for all schools, I think it's been a really interesting, eye-opening moment for independent and boarding schools in general, because people are more willing to listen.
Absolutely, and the perspective has changed, but I do feel the same way with you. I don't think that you're going to be able to, at least at a campus-wide scale, I don't think that you're going to be able to say, okay, now we can get back to normal. Like that's not going to happen. We're going to be having to creatively, in all of our departments, we're going to be having to creatively dive into what can we be doing better to make this work, given the circumstances of today, because those circumstances are going to change quite variably over the next few years for sure.
100%.
Well, Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today. Wow, what a good conversation. I really appreciate all your insights and everything you brought to the table today. I wish you nothing but the best of luck during your re-enrollment period and navigating the pandemic up there in New York. I know you're going to be getting some snow, so have fun with that.
Yay, the snowshoes. Thank you so much, Jesse. This has been really fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, that'll do it for us today. I hope you enjoyed everything. Be sure to go to our website, schoolcraftdigital.com, and check out all of these pages. We also have all of our shows on the YouTube channel. And if you haven't liked us on Facebook yet, please do. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you so much and have a great week.